It was the kind of morning that felt like a postcard from suburbia. The sun cast soft golden light across well-manicured lawns, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and freshly mowed grass, and the only real sound, aside from the occasional bark from behind a picket fence, was the rhythmic hum of sprinklers watering rose bushes and sod. Clearbrook Estates, an affluent, tightly managed gated community nestled just outside the city, prided itself on order, uniformity, and an unspoken social contract that everything from the mailboxes to the mulch must look just right. At the center of this carefully curated neighborhood ecosystem was none other than Linda Cartwright, president of the Homeowners Association for the past 7 years running, a woman known equally for her meticulous rule enforcement as she was for her oversized sunglasses and clipboard that seemed permanently fused to her hand. Her morning routine was sacrosanct. Wake up at precisely 6 a.m., walk her yappy Pomeranian named Snickerdoodle around the block twice, and inspect for violations. Trash cans too close to the curb? Noted. A kid's bicycle left on the front lawn overnight? Citation. Lawn not edged perfectly? Warning. Today, however, her routine took a sharp turn the moment she rounded the cul-de-sac and caught sight of an unfamiliar, matte black Jeep Wrangler parked just outside the community playground fence, near the maintenance shed, technically within HOA jurisdiction, but just far enough to make it seem like it was hiding in plain sight. Linda's lips pursed into a line so thin it could cut glass. The vehicle had been there yesterday too, she now realized, with no community parking tag, no guest pass, and worst of all, no HOA-issued parking decal on the windshield. This is how crime starts, she muttered to herself, tightening her grip on Snickerdoodle's leash, who barked furiously at a passing squirrel and tugged her forward. The Jeep was dusty, its windows tinted so dark that she could barely make out the interior, and there was a heavy-duty padlock securing the spare tire compartment, something she deemed highly suspicious. To her, vehicles like this didn't belong in Clearbrook Estates. They belonged downtown. Or in a Jason Bourne movie. Her eyes scanned the area, no one around. Most of the neighborhood was still waking up, sipping coffee inside their immaculate kitchens with granite countertops and farmhouse sinks, unaware of the potential threat parked mere feet from where their children played on monkey bars. Her heart pounded, not out of fear but righteous indignation. She whipped out her iPhone and snapped 5 photos from different angles, making sure to include the missing sticker, the dusty tires, and the location relative to the HOA sign that clearly stated, "Authorized vehicles only." She opened the HOA violation reporting app but hesitated. This wasn't just a matter of procedure. This was personal. Linda took the Jeep as an affront to everything she stood for. Order, rules, respect for authority. She marched back toward her house in a huff, Snickerdoodle panting behind her, and by the time she reached her front porch she was already texting 2 members of the HOA board and leaving a voicemail for a local locksmith she had on speed dial, Mr. Greger's son, who once helped her rekey the clubhouse after someone broke in to steal the yoga mats. "Hi Greg, I have a situation I need your help with. It's urgent. We've got a vehicle that may be abandoned or, frankly, suspicious, and I need the lock on the rear access cut so we can look inside. It's on HOA land, so we have jurisdiction. Call me back ASAP." She hung up and sipped from her #1HOA president mug, steam curling over her stern face as her mind began forming a plan. She wouldn't just report the vehicle. She would remove it. Personally if necessary. Because if there was one thing Linda Cartwright couldn't tolerate, more than mismatched patio furniture or holiday decorations still up in February, it was a blatant disregard for neighborhood rules. She didn't know what was in the Jeep, who it belonged to, or why it was parked there, but she didn't care. In her world, suspicion alone was guilt enough, and she had already sentenced the vehicle and whoever owned it in her mind. She imagined herself being interviewed on local news, standing triumphantly in front of the Jeep as reporters praised her vigilance. Community hero prevents possible crime. Her phone buzzed. It was Greg the locksmith. "I'll be there in 30, he said. "What exactly am I cutting into?" She smiled. "Just a Jeep. Nothing we can't handle." True to his word, Greg the locksmith rolled into Clearbrook Estates 30 minutes later in his aging white utility van with faded blue letters that read, "Gregerson Lock and Key, since 1987. He didn't exactly fit in with the polished ambience of the community. His uniform shirt was wrinkled, his boots stained with oil, and his music, an old rock station blaring Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'," echoed loudly through the open van windows as he parked beside the Jeep. Linda was already waiting, arms crossed and foot tapping like a ticking bomb. "You're late," she said even though he wasn't. Greg raised a brow but didn't argue. He'd dealt with Linda before. You didn't win arguments with her, you escaped them. "This the car?" he asked, eyeing the matte black Jeep with an expression that could only be described as professionally skeptical. "It's not a car, Greg, it's a menace," she replied, handing him a printed copy of the HOA's emergency vehicle removal clause, which she'd highlighted and annotated in red pen. "It's been parked here for over 36 hours with no authorization, no HOA sticker, and no resident reporting it. That's abandonment under Article 14, Section 3, Subclause B." Greg nodded slowly, not really reading the document. He walked a slow circle around the vehicle, whistling under his breath. "Heavy-duty lock. Industrial grade. This ain't no standard bike padlock," he said, crouching to inspect it. "Looks like something military. You sure this isn't like some kind of police thing?" Linda scoffed. "Please? If it were police, it would have a badge or plate or something. This is just some punk thinking he can stash his off-road junk here while he crashes with his girlfriend or sells weed out the back." Greg raised his eyebrows again but kept quiet. He wasn't sure about the weed part, but the lock definitely wasn't the kind you'd use for an old toolbox. He unpacked his cutting tools anyway, bolt cutters first, then a battery-powered angle grinder just in case. "You're sure about this?" he asked one last time, hand hovering over the lock. "Absolutely," Linda said, her voice crisp with authority. "The HOA has jurisdiction. I'll take full responsibility." Famous last words. As Greg powered up the angle grinder, sparks flew for only a few seconds before the lock gave in with a loud clunk, metal snapping clean. Linda leaned in eagerly, brushing Greg aside as she pulled the Jeep's reinforced rear gate open. Inside was no duffel bag or random tools. What lay inside looked like something out of a Tom Clancy novel. Rows of neatly secured tactical gear lined the interior. A Kevlar vest with a federal emblem embroidered subtly on the shoulder strap. A satellite uplink case, high-end surveillance cameras still mounted to interior rigs, and a laptop wired into what appeared to be a surveillance receiver, humming faintly with blinking lights. Linda froze, her mouth parting slightly. "What is this?" she asked as if the universe would answer. Greg took one look and immediately stepped back, alarmed. "Linda, this isn't normal. This ain't some college kid's Jeep. This is government grade. Like federal." He spotted a sealed black envelope with a gold eagle insignia half-tucked into a side pocket labeled, "Operation Nighthouse, Task 47. Linda's fingers hovered over it but stopped. For a brief moment, her mind went silent. No HOA codes, no control, just a slowly dawning realization that she might have made a catastrophic mistake. "Maybe it's props," she offered weakly, though she sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "Maybe someone's filming a movie?" Greg shook his head, backing away farther now. "Lady, if this is a movie, Spielberg's funding it. I'm not sticking around." He picked up his tools, tossed them into his van without his usual care, and said, "I didn't see anything and I was never here. This is way above my pay grade." As he drove off, tires squealing slightly, Linda stood there alone, staring into the belly of the black Jeep as the sun rose higher and the neighborhood slowly came to life. But she wasn't done yet. No, not Linda. Panic tried to creep in, but her need for control was stronger. She pulled out her phone and called a towing company. "Yes," she said, voice tight but composed. "I need a vehicle removed from Clearbrook Estates immediately. No plates, suspicious contents, possible code violation." She didn't mention the surveillance gear. She didn't mention the federal seals. She certainly didn't mention the acronym FBI, stitched into one of the tactical bags. All she knew was that this Jeep was parked illegally, and she'd be damned if it made a fool out of her. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that 3 blocks away, a man in an unmarked surveillance van was watching her through a screen, his face turning from confusion to alarm as he saw the lock being cut and the gear being exposed in real time. Agent Ramirez grabbed his radio. "We have a breach. Repeat, we have a breach on the asset. Deploy now." Agent Marcus Ramirez was not easily rattled. He had spent 10 years with Homeland Security and 4 with a multi-agency narcotics task force, most of it spent tailing cartel-linked suspects through alleys, border towns, and seedy truck depots where every shadow could hold a bullet. But nothing in his service had prepared him for the absurdity of what he was witnessing now. A middle-aged suburban woman with a sparkling visor and a coffee mug that read, "Mess with the HO, get the no-no," standing triumphantly beside a black Jeep packed with federal surveillance equipment, barking orders to a tow truck operator like she was running her own SWAT unit. He stared at the live feed on the monitor, trying to make sense of the scene. There was the target vehicle, his team's mobile command post, used for low-visibility surveillance on a trafficking route that ran from the industrial rail yard through the suburbs. There was the open rear gate, equipment fully exposed. And there was the woman, Linda Cartwright, if facial ID from the neighborhood registry was accurate, motioning for the tow truck to back up and secure the Jeep with steel cables. "You've got to be kidding me," Ramirez muttered, tossing his protein bar into the van's cup holder and slamming his laptop shut. "Dispatch, this is Echo 7. We have an asset breach in progress at the Clearbrook Estates perimeter, coordinates uploading. Send backup immediately, 3 units minimum. Suspect is, well, she's not a suspect, more like HOA affiliated? Civilian interference. But the gear is hot, repeat, the gear is hot and visible." He had barely finished speaking when his partner, Agent Janelle Price, yanked open the rear van door, already wearing her vest. "Tell me this is a joke," she said, throwing him a look of incredulity. "I thought I was hallucinating. That lady literally just cut the lock." Ramirez grabbed the ignition key, fired up the engine and peeled out of the alley. "Oh, she did more than that. She opened it, photographed it, called a tow truck, and now she's trying to impound federal property like it's a broken trampoline left on a neighbor's lawn." As they rounded the corner, cutting through traffic with lights hidden but sirens ready to activate, Ramirez gave her the quick lowdown. "Intel confirms, she's the HOA president, known locally as a neighborhood tyrant. Dozens of code enforcement reports for restraining order attempts, and a community Facebook group called Free Us from Linda, with nearly 400 members." Price blinked. "Sounds like a threat to national peace." Ramirez cracked a grim smile. "Today? She's a threat to a 6-month-long undercover operation." 2 blocks ahead, the tow truck had just finished securing the Jeep, its front wheels lifted off the pavement as the winch hissed under pressure. Linda stood to the side, arms crossed in satisfaction, like she'd just solved a crime. "If someone doesn't stop her in 30 seconds, Ramirez muttered as they approached the cul-de-sac, "that truck's gonna roll this entire operation right into impound, and we'll be filling out paperwork for a year." The black SUV screeched around the final bend, drawing stares from joggers and gardeners alike. No sirens. No lights. Just tinted windows and momentum. Ramirez jumped out before the vehicle had fully stopped, badge already in hand. "Federal agents. Step away from the vehicle. Now." The tow truck driver nearly stumbled off the platform in panic. Linda, however, didn't flinch. In fact, she looked offended. "Excuse me, who are you?" she demanded, stepping forward as Price and 2 backup agents moved in behind Ramirez, guns holstered but clearly ready. Ramirez didn't entertain her tone. "Special Agent Ramirez, Homeland Security. This vehicle is part of an ongoing federal investigation. You've just tampered with classified surveillance equipment." Linda's eyes narrowed. "No, you tampered with our community standards. That vehicle has no permit, no sticker, and no business being parked within HOA boundaries." Ramirez's jaw clenched. "Ma'am, this isn't a community issue. It's a matter of national security." She waved a manicured hand. "So why didn't you put a sign on it? You can't just park random Jeeps and expect people not to enforce the law." Behind her, Price was checking the vehicle. "Equipment's still intact, but the rear case has been opened. Looks like some photos were taken. Hopefully nothing was removed." Ramirez stepped in closer. "Did you take anything from inside the vehicle, Mrs. Cartwright?" Her eyes flicked toward the open hatch. "Of course not. I just took a few photos for documentation. I thought maybe it was involved in something shady." He leaned forward, voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "It was involved in something shady, Linda. That was the point." She flinched. For the first time, her confidence seemed to crack and her mouth opened, then shut. "Look, I was just doing my duty," she offered meekly. "You've done more than that," Ramirez said. "You've compromised the integrity of a months-long sting operation, potentially blown the cover of several agents, and had we not arrived in time, you might have had a federal vehicle impounded and inventoried by civilian contractors. You understand how bad that could have gone." She looked like she was shrinking. Still upright, still proud, but no longer righteous, now defensive. The tow truck driver raised a hand nervously. "So, should I unhook it now?" Agent Ramirez didn't answer the tow truck driver right away. He stared at Linda with a look that hovered between disbelief and professional restraint, then slowly turned toward the Jeep. "Unhook it," he said without looking back. The driver, eager to vanish from whatever this was turning into, scrambled to release the tension cables and dropped the Jeep's front tires gently back to the pavement. The hydraulic lift hissed and groaned, metal clanking in protest as the vehicle was lowered. Ramirez approached the open rear hatch, scanning the interior. 1,000 thoughts raced through his head. Had the transmission feed been compromised? Was the encrypted uplink still functioning? What photos had she taken and where were they now? Agent Price was already inside the Jeep, carefully powering on the tactical laptop mounted to a swivel arm. Feed still running, she said after a tense 30 seconds. No data wiped. Surveillance storage hasn't been touched. She didn't access the laptop interface. Ramirez exhaled, slightly. Check the dashcam files. I want to know exactly when the lock was breached and for how long she was inside. Linda hovered nearby, arms crossed again but tighter now as if trying to hold herself together. If you're trying to intimidate me it won't work, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. Ramirez turned. Ma'am, this isn't intimidation. This is investigation. What you did was illegal. At best, it was tampering with federal property. At worst, obstruction of justice. Her eyes widened slightly. Wait, obstruction? That's a crime. Yes, he replied coolly. A federal one. Linda's jaw slackened. For a moment she looked like she might faint, but pride steadied her knees. But it was abandoned, she tried. There was no sign, no license plate. I thought it was a safety hazard. Ramirez took a step toward her, lowering his voice again. We don't label our vehicles, ma'am. Because they're undercover. That's the point. The people we track don't know they're being watched. The second someone interferes with our setup, that surveillance is blown, our targets get suspicious, and the entire operation has to be restructured. Sometimes people die when operations are blown. The last line hit her like a slap. Die, she whispered. Price chimed in from the Jeep, not bothering to sugarcoat. You just pulled the mask off an active sting. That's not a code violation. That's a federal breach. Linda's breath hitched and for the first time she said nothing. No defense, no protest. Just silence. The tow truck began to back away, wheels crunching over the paved lane, the driver keeping his gaze straight ahead like a man desperate to disappear. Ramirez walked back toward the SUV and opened the rear hatch, pulling out a long black case. He opened it to reveal 2 backup drones and a communications tablet. He checked the display. Somebody tripped the proximity alarm around 10:48 a.m. That lines up with when the lock was cut. She had the vehicle open for 28 minutes before the camera cut to static, likely caused by vibration from the tow cables. He looked up. That's 28 minutes our targets might have had to detect a change. 28 minutes for them to ghost us. Linda clutched her phone in both hands now, white-knuckled. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Exactly, Price snapped. You didn't know but you acted anyway. Because you thought you knew better. And that's the most dangerous kind of civilian in our line of work. Ramirez gave her a look, a signal to ease off. This woman wasn't a criminal, not exactly. But she was the kind of person who didn't think rules applied to her. The irony was painful. A rule enforcer who thought she was above the biggest rule of all. Don't interfere with what you don't understand. Ma'am, Ramirez said more evenly now, I need your phone. Her grip tightened. My, what? Why? Because you said you took photos of the interior. That's classified surveillance equipment. We can't have pictures of that floating around. I didn't post anything, she said quickly. I just took them, for evidence in case I needed to report it to the board. And where are they now? Price asked, stepping closer. Linda blinked. In my camera roll. Good. We'll take it from here. She hesitated, glanced between them, then unlocked her phone and handed it over, face flushed, jaw set. She looked like a woman who had lost a battle she didn't even know she was fighting. Ramirez passed the phone to Price, who immediately began transferring the relevant images into the federal evidence cloud, then wiped the local copies. We'll return this shortly, she said. Linda gave a short nod but didn't speak. Ramirez glanced around the now crowding cul-de-sac. Curious neighbors were starting to emerge, phones out, recording from driveways and behind shrubs. A few kids had their bikes paused on the sidewalk, gawking like it was a Netflix shoot. He sighed. We're gonna need to make a statement before this turns into a circus. Ramirez stepped forward into the center of the cul-de-sac, scanning the semicircle of neighbors now gathered like a suburban jury. Most were still in pajamas or athletic wear, clutching mugs and whispering behind their phones as they discreetly, and not so discreetly, filmed the scene. The black Jeep, now re-anchored and secure, sat like a wounded animal under the gaze of half a dozen eyes, its back hatch still partially open, revealing the strange tactical contents that would become the centerpiece of neighborhood gossip for weeks. Ramirez knew the footage would hit the internet within the hour, if it hadn't already. He turned to Agent Price and gave a quick hand signal. She nodded, stepping toward the crowd, holding up her badge in both hands. Good morning, everyone. We are federal agents conducting a security operation. I'm going to ask that you please put away your phones and return to your homes for your safety. This is not a public matter." The words had a practiced rhythm to them, but their effect was mixed. Some neighbors backed away reluctantly, others zoomed in. Ramirez stepped beside her, his tone more direct. "Anyone who continues to record will be asked to submit that footage to federal evidence. If you choose to delete it now, that's your choice, but understand, this is an active federal site." That did the trick. A few phones dipped immediately. The rest hovered a little longer before being pocketed, replaced by muttered questions. "What's going on? Was that car bugged? Is someone getting arrested? Are we in danger?" Ramirez looked back at Linda, who now stood about 10 feet away with her arms hugging herself, visibly shrinking under the weight of attention. Her usual confidence, the clipped words, the arched brow, the smile with no warmth, was gone. What remained was a woman realizing the scale of her misstep. He stepped back toward her. "We're not charging you," he said flatly. "Yet." She looked up, startled. "Yet? You've technically violated several federal laws, but we're prioritizing operational containment over prosecution. That means cleaning up the breach and resuming surveillance without losing our targets." Her brows pinched together. "What targets?" Ramirez ignored the question. "But let me be clear. If those photos had been posted, if this Jeep had made it to an impound lot, or if even one piece of gear had gone missing, you'd already be in the back of a black SUV on your way to a federal holding facility." Her lips parted slightly, then closed again, no words coming out. She was starting to realize this wasn't about embarrassment or power anymore. It was about consequences. "From now on," Ramirez continued, "you will not approach or interfere with any unmarked vehicles in this neighborhood unless directed to by law enforcement. You will inform your HOA board that federal operations are underway in this area. You will not mention our presence publicly, not to neighbors, not to local media, and definitely not on your community Facebook group." "How do you know about our—" she started but stopped again. "We know everything," Price said, returning from the Jeep with Linda's phone, now wiped of classified photos and data. She handed it back. "And if you think you can work around us, don't." Linda took the phone with both hands, her voice barely a whisper. "I understand." Ramirez studied her for another second. She wasn't a criminal. Not the kind he usually dealt with. But she was something far more dangerous in certain environments. Someone who thought good intentions made her immune to consequences. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "next time you see a vehicle you don't recognize, try knocking on a few doors before calling a locksmith." "I didn't call the locksmith," she muttered automatically. "I asked for a favor." "Even worse," Price replied. "That makes it a conspiracy." That word hung in the air a beat too long. Linda looked like she wanted to crawl into the very mulch beds she so fiercely protected. Ramirez turned to his team. "We need to sweep the Jeep, run a full diagnostic, replace the uplink, and confirm whether we still have clean access to the target's communication lines. If we don't, this entire cell could disappear by nightfall." "Got it," Price said, already tapping into the laptop interface, her hands a blur. The crowd had mostly dispersed now, save for a few kids still peering through bike helmets. Ramirez looked up and locked eyes with a man standing on a front porch across the cul-de-sac. A man who hadn't moved or flinched once, just silently observed. The man nodded once, then stepped back inside his house. Ramirez made a mental note. There were always watchers within watchers. The operation might have survived Linda's blunder, but the ripples were already spreading. In this line of work, even a small splash could tip the boat. By late afternoon, Clearbrook Estates had returned to a fragile sense of normal. Children played again on the sidewalks, dog walkers resumed their loops, and lawnmowers hummed like a distant lullaby across the cul-de-sac where just hours earlier a federal operation had nearly been derailed by a woman with a clipboard and too much time. But while the neighborhood facade had settled back into place, something beneath the surface had changed, both in the quiet movements of the federal agents and in the cautious, almost shamefaced steps of Linda Cartwright, who now remained inside her home with the blinds drawn, her HOA hotline voicemail disabled, and her prized clipboard leaning untouched in the corner by the door. For the first time in her adult life, she had no words. She didn't even know what to write in the HOA weekly email, which she usually drafted with the fervor of a manifesto. How do you explain to residents that the Jeep you reported, broke into, and nearly had towed was part of a covert federal sting operation targeting high-level drug trafficking across state lines? How do you tell your board that your actions almost resulted in felony charges? You don't. Instead, you retreat. You bake. You water your begonias twice in one day and pretend you've always been that kind of neighbor, the quiet one. But people talk. The video clips, though mostly deleted, had spread far enough. Someone had screen recorded a TikTok before taking it down, and now it existed in digital limbo, reshared in group chats titled Karen vs. The Feds and Linda Gate. The neighborhood teenagers thought it was hilarious. The parents? Less so. Ramirez and Price meanwhile were working around the clock. The breach meant rechecking everything: the surveillance rig, the microphone arrays, the dummy signal repeaters. The laptop inside the Jeep had to be cloned, then rebuilt with new encryption. The Jeep itself was wiped down and its rear panel resealed with a more tamper-proof magnetic locking system, one that required a key fob only 2 agents had access to. They replaced the Jeep's position too, moving it slightly closer to the service alley that backed up to several homes suspected of housing the trafficking ring's logistics team. Ramirez hadn't told Linda that. He hadn't told anyone exactly what was going on, only that their presence was necessary and that silence was required. But the mission had been exposed now, even if only slightly. And that meant risks. That meant suspects might move, communications might cease, and operatives embedded deeper in the ring might suddenly vanish without a trace. That night, Ramirez sat inside the unmarked surveillance van, sipping cold black coffee, the city lights barely reaching the tinted window slits. Price sat across from him, her laptop casting a blue glow across her face. "Signal's still clean," she said. "They haven't moved. No electronic chatter. No change in their packet behavior." Ramirez nodded, though he didn't fully relax. "They might be playing it smart. Laying low until they know whether they've been burned." Price glanced at him. "You really think Cartwright's interference tipped them off?" He exhaled through his nose. "Hard to say. Best case scenario? They saw the Jeep get messed with and assumed it was just a break-in. Worst case? They clocked our gear, ran facial recognition, and now they're waiting to ghost. We need to fast-track," she said. "Push the takedown timeline up a week. Maybe 2. Already told HQ the same." He swiveled his chair slightly, scanning the monitors, live feeds from static cameras mounted in mailboxes, one embedded inside a fake decorative rock, another inside a lawn care truck parked 2 blocks over. He had eyes on every possible point of contact and still it didn't feel like enough. All because one suburban warlord thought she knew better, he muttered. "Linda Cartwright," Price said with a faint smile, the kind that meant she was tired. "The only civilian to make it onto our daily briefing without getting arrested." Ramirez chuckled once, though it was hollow. "If she does it again she will get arrested." "You think she learned her lesson?" He thought about that. The way she had shrunk during the confrontation. The quiet, "I understand." The hesitation when handing over her phone, not out of defiance but out of fear. "She did," he said finally. "But people like her, they bounce back. Pride doesn't die easy. She'll find some other crusade, maybe barking dogs or mailbox paint violations. But she'll stay away from Jeeps with blacked-out windows. Of that I'm certain." They sat in silence for a while, the hum of cooling fans filling the van as the data feeds rolled on. The operation, though bruised, was still alive. Target still in place. Surveillance still viable. And the woman who nearly blew it all, well, she was busy writing a draft email titled, "Important Notice About Community Awareness, a Personal Reflection." Ramirez didn't know that yet. But he'd smile when he read it in the classified HOA community bulletin intercepted by their spoofed neighborhood server. "She really is writing a confession," Price would laugh. "Kind of." Ramirez would shake his head. "This job, man. You think you've seen it all, and then a 60-year-old woman in a sun hat takes down your comms van." 3 days later, the Clearbrook Estates HOA boardroom was packed tighter than a church bake sale before the gates of hell. Folding chairs lined the walls, cheap coffee burned in a bubbling percolator near the corner, and the usual placid hum of procedural neighborhood bickering had been replaced by an awkward, buzzing silence. The reason? The Department of Homeland Security had called for an emergency community cooperation briefing, and no one quite knew what that meant. The board, usually composed of 7 retired or semi-retired suburban monarchs in pastel sweaters and matching notepads, now found themselves face-to-face with a panel of grim-faced federal agents in plain suits. Linda Cartwright sat at the far end of the table, her clipboard absent for the first time anyone could remember, replaced by a printed apology statement she clutched like a prayer book. She hadn't spoken a word since she walked in, and for once she wasn't seated in the center. The seat had been taken by Agent Ramirez. "Let's begin," he said, placing a black folder on the table, emblazoned with a golden Homeland Security seal. "What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room. The board shifted uncomfortably. One man in a golf shirt raised a hand. Wait, do you mean we're under investigation? No, Ramirez said, but if anyone violates operational security from this moment forward, they will be. That shut him up. Ramirez continued, his voice calm but heavy. We've been conducting a covert investigation into a trafficking network using suburban neighborhoods like this one as logistics hubs. Drop points. Way stations. The perpetrators assume gated communities offer the illusion of safety and insulation. They're right. Most people never suspect their quiet neighbor might be laundering cartel money or stashing encrypted phones in a backyard shed. A few board members glanced around nervously, suddenly wondering if their own neighbors were harboring more than decorative garden gnomes. Ramirez ignored the looks. We had a surveillance vehicle set up within community lines. It was critical. Unmarked. Hidden in plain sight. As most of you are aware, a member of this board, here, his eyes flicked toward Linda without naming her, tampered with that vehicle. Cut the lock. Exposed classified equipment. Called in a third-party tow contractor. A murmur went through the room. Linda sank a little lower in her chair. Now, he went on, this is not the part where we issue arrests or pass around handcuffs. We chose not to press federal charges. Not yet. Instead, we are extending an opportunity. That raised eyebrows. A few board members leaned forward, intrigued. We're requesting the HOA's full cooperation for the remainder of our operation, Ramirez said. That means you do not report suspicious unmarked vehicles. You do not interfere with strangers using parked cars as observation points. You do not mention this meeting to your residents, neighbors, or family. Another board member, a stern woman named Karen Baumgartner, yes, her real name, raised her hand stiffly. What if something is suspicious? We've always had protocols. Ramirez raised a single eyebrow. If you suspect anything unusual, you'll have a direct line to our office. Not the police. Not private security. Not your neighborhood watch Facebook group. Us. He placed a contact card on the table. If we hear of any interference, we'll shut the operation down. That may sound like a solution to some of you. But if this network remains in place, you'll have more to worry about than one black Jeep. Cartels don't care about your HOA guidelines. They don't care if your hydrangeas match your neighbors. They will use your streets to move millions of dollars worth of product, and the moment you inconvenience them, well, let's just say they're not known for restraint. That landed hard. Even Karen went quiet. Another board member whispered, Jesus Christ, under his breath. Linda, to her credit, finally spoke. Her voice was low, dry. I understand the risk I caused. It was arrogant. I acted without understanding the context. Ramirez gave a curt nod. Acknowledged. She looked up, eyes meeting his. I'll do whatever it takes to support the operation moving forward. That's good, Ramirez said. Because we'll need your cooperation. Yours in particular. A murmur swept the room again. You've already drawn attention, he explained. Whether you intended to or not, you're now a variable the suspects may have noticed. That means we need to reframe you. Reposition you. You're going to help us. From inside. Linda blinked. You want me to be a source? Not quite, Price said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. We want you to be yourself. Loud. Proud. Over-involved. But this time we'll be directing that energy. The room froze. Linda glanced around, unsure if this was punishment or opportunity. You'll act as our eyes, Ramirez added. Publicly you'll resume your duties. But privately you'll funnel anything unusual directly to us. Anyone watching you will assume you're back to your old ways. We'll know better. And just like that, Linda Cartwright, HOA president, clipboard queen, neighborhood tyrant, became an unwitting federal asset. The irony of becoming a federal asset wasn't lost on Linda Cartwright. Once the undisputed queen of community compliance, dispenser of passive-aggressive letters, champion of hedge height ordinances, and enforcer of trash bin etiquette, she now found herself serving an altogether different mission. Surveil, observe, report. But this time, the stakes weren't overgrown lawns or unapproved patio furniture. This time, she was watching for coded drop-offs, unfamiliar vehicles with tinted windows, late-night movements between garages and garden sheds. Signals that something deeper, darker, and far more dangerous lurked behind the well-manicured veneer of Clearbrook Estates. To the rest of the neighborhood, Linda had returned to her old ways. The clipboard was back. The daily walks resumed. She even started a new subcommittee called Operation Neighborhood Integrity, which to most sounded like a tired rebranding of her usual micromanagement. But in reality, every step she took, Every concern she filed, and every conversation she casually inserted herself into was part of a quiet operation monitored by a federal task force that had wired her with a button-sized mic hidden in the clasp of her gold necklace. It was Agent Price's idea. "Nobody notices jewelry," she'd said, looping the tiny device into the clasp like a skilled thief. "And you strike me as someone who never leaves the house without pearls or a pendant." Linda had almost taken offense, until she realized Price wasn't mocking her. She was weaponizing her. At first, Linda fumbled with the role. She didn't understand the subtlety of observation. She would ramble too long on conversations, forgetting to let people speak. She'd accidentally mention patterns of activity, or ask questions too directly, making neighbors pull away. Ramirez warned her. "You're not interrogating," he said. "You're blending. Think of yourself as background noise, not a spotlight." But over time Linda improved. She learned to ask the right questions, gently. She learned to pretend she wasn't paying attention when she was. She developed a rhythm, and as the weeks passed, something strange began to happen. She enjoyed it. There was a thrill in the secrecy, in knowing she was playing a part in something bigger than landscaping disputes. There was power in being trusted, by the federal government no less. It made her HOA meetings feel quaint by comparison. And the information began to flow. It started with a note tucked under a brick near the northeast entrance to the park, folded in half and stained slightly at the edge. Linda had seen a teenager place it there during a late-night walk, a boy she'd never seen in the neighborhood before. She marked the time, described the clothing, and took a discreet photo of the brick with her phone. By morning the note was gone, but her report wasn't. Within hours, Agent Price confirmed it was part of a low-tech signal exchange, a dead drop used by couriers when burner phones weren't an option. "This is good," Price had said, genuinely impressed. "You saw something we missed." Then came the lawn care crew. Linda had noticed they were new, not the usual crew used by the Jennings family on Sycamore Court. These men worked too quickly. They never interacted with the homeowners. Their equipment looked rented. And on 3 occasions, Linda noted, they arrived and left within 15 minutes, without having trimmed a single hedge. She reported the pattern. Ramirez's team reviewed footage. 2 of the men were flagged in facial recognition databases as intermediaries for an arms trafficking cell tied to a larger cartel syndicate. The lawn crew wasn't landscaping. They were scoping storage locations. Surveillance on them increased immediately. It was surreal. The world Linda had once ruled through covenants and bylaws was now revealed to be a thin veil hiding an entire criminal network, masked by azaleas and American flags. What had once been her kingdom of mulch and mailbox measurements had transformed into a covert battlefield, and she was right in the middle. Yet, with the rise in her effectiveness came something Ramirez hadn't anticipated: independence. Linda began taking initiative, sometimes too much. She adjusted her patrol routes. She created decoy situations, dropping anonymous letters into her own mailbox to see who might respond. She staged a fake complaint against a neighbor whose garage lights flickered in Morse-like patterns, hoping it would trigger a defensive reaction. Price confronted her after that one. "This isn't a TV show," she said, holding up a flagged internal report. "You're not Carrie Matheson in Pearls." Linda didn't flinch. "But I'm producing results, aren't I?" That gave Price pause. Because technically yes, she was. Linda Cartwright was succeeding. Not as a community enforcer but as an embedded civilian intelligence relay. And the scary part wasn't that she was enjoying it. The scary part was that she might actually be good at it. That evening, Ramirez sat alone in the van, reading the latest intel summary from Linda. It was detailed, precise, alarmingly thorough. He looked out the tinted window toward her house. The porch light was on. The flag was perfectly centered. And in the flower bed, a new lawn sign read, "Neighborhood Watch, we see everything." He shook his head, chuckled once, then muttered, "God help the cartel." It was a Thursday when everything unraveled, and oddly it began with a missing recycling bin. Linda was doing her routine circuit when she noticed it. House 1142 on Marigold Lane had no bin at the curb, even though it was scheduled pickup day. It was unlike the occupant, Mrs. Diaz, a meticulous widow with a calendar color-coded for every city service. Linda paused. Then she noticed something else. The welcome mat was askew. The porch light was flickering. The small Ring camera that once blinked with blue readiness was completely dark. These were details no one else would have seen or cared about. But Linda noticed, and so she stopped walking. She pulled out her phone, not to report a code violation, but to initiate Protocol V, a special contact sequence Ramirez had given her, reserved for situations that smelled wrong. She didn't even have to speak. Just open the secure app, press the red circle and let the phone transmit. She walked on, pretending to continue her route. Within 9 minutes, a black Suburban eased down the street. By 14 minutes, Agent Price was inside house 1142, gun drawn. Mrs. Diaz was gone. A single chair had been overturned. The back door, forced open. Within the hour, a full takedown was authorized. The network Ramirez had been tracking building case files on for months had clearly made a move, one that suggested they knew they were being watched. Somehow the surveillance net had been breached. The irony wasn't lost on him. They'd placed an undercover vehicle inside the neighborhood, and the first breach had come from the neighborhood itself. Now they'd used the neighborhood again to trigger the endgame. Linda's alert didn't just tip the scale, it flipped the entire table. Over the next 48 hours, raids were conducted at 3 properties, 2 within Clearbrook Estates, 1 just outside the gates. Weapons were recovered. Storage containers with fake drywall compartments. Digital hard drives linked to anonymous cryptocurrency wallets. What shocked Ramirez most wasn't just the size of the operation, it was how close they'd gotten to slipping away unnoticed. The Clearbrook hub, it turned out, had been scheduled for deactivation within days. And without Linda's keen eye on a misplaced bin, they would have missed it all. "You realize what you've done?" he told her later, standing outside the HOA clubhouse after the last briefing. She wore a navy blouse, her clipboard gone, replaced by a thin folder filled with classified release forms. "I just reported what I saw," she said. "No, you did more than that," Ramirez replied. "You turned one of the most buttoned-up, nosy HOAs in the state into a functional surveillance matrix." Linda allowed a tight smile. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He chuckled. "It's terrifying. But also, oddly effective." She shifted slightly. "Does that mean it's over?" Ramirez hesitated. "For now, yes. But something tells me this neighborhood isn't done producing intelligence." "Should I keep watching?" she asked carefully. "Only if you want to," he said. "But understand this life, this role, it's not always so clean. There are no ribbons. No press releases." Linda nodded, her expression unreadable. "I never needed a ribbon. I just needed someone to listen." They stood in silence a moment, the sound of sprinklers clicking to life in the distance. For a neighborhood that had just played host to a federal sting, Clearbrook Estates looked deceptively peaceful, like nothing had ever happened. A few streets over, the HOA signboard advertised the upcoming fall chili cook-off. A kid rode by on a scooter, earbuds in, oblivious. But Linda knew better now. The quiet didn't mean safety. It only meant the real threats had gotten better at hiding. That night, back in her home, she sat down with a fresh cup of tea and opened her laptop. No HOA reports. No violations. Instead, she opened a new document titled Clearbrook Intel, Ongoing Anomalies. She began typing. House 1197 received 3 Amazon packages labeled Pet Supplies. Homeowner does not own pets. A man on corner of Hawthorne and Pine observed driving identical black sedan twice within 3 hours. Second instance had no license plate. A garage lights at house 1203 flashed in 2-3-2 sequence again, same as observed on June 12. A Mrs. Whitmore's cat, previously skittish, has not been seen in 4 days. She paused at that last one. Maybe it was nothing. Or maybe it was a sign. With Linda Cartwright now watching, everything meant something. She saved the file and leaned back, the light from the screen illuminating her face in the quiet. No badge. No paycheck. No glory. Just the knowledge that her neighborhood wasn't what it seemed, and never had been. Somewhere far from Clearbrook, Agent Price reviewed the intel and smiled. The best assets, she thought, aren't trained. They're born. And sometimes they live in cul-de-sacs.